Shalom and welcome to TBN Israel, the podcast. Today we're going to talk about Gaza. Are we going to go inside the Gaza Strip again? Mati's already dressed, as you can see. Are we going to have an extension of the ceasefire agreement? Are we going to release more hostages? Are we going to transfer all the Palestinians from Gaza to Egypt, to Jordan, rebuild it, create something better? Who knows? I'm here with the one and only Mati Shoshani.
Good to be with you, Yair, back in Israel.
Yeah, and we have an amazing crowd here, all the way from the United States. It's good to see you in person. It's a lot more interesting to have you in front of us and not just, talking to cameras.
Not just us yelling at each other in the studio.
Yeah, definitely. So, Mati, let's maybe give an understanding of where we're standing now. Ceasefire Phase A ended. What's on the table next?
So I think today we're going to have to delve a lot into the hypothetical and the speculation. We're in a really weird place. We've been at a ceasefire that ended more than a week ago. There's been countless ideas that are floated by the U.S. administration, by Israel, by Hamas themselves, all of them saying that they're the next phase in the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. None of them so far have materialized into anything more than an idea. And at this point, Hamas still has hostages. They have 59 hostages.
59 hostages.
Israeli
Out
hostages.
of them, 35 are no longer alive.
Yeah, so they have about half of what they had in the previous round. We still have a good amount of, let's call it Hamas and Palestinian terrorists in our prison system. But the ceasefire has ended. Israel is mobilizing. Our new Chief of Staff, Zamir, has very publicly stated and sort of rallied the troops to say, get ready, we're going back into
More than
the
that,
Gaza
he said,
Strip.
I have plans to conquer the Gaza Strip and to kick Hamas out, basically.
Yeah, and this, to say this as an opening, this isn't saber rattling. We're not like just making motions of we're going back in. The army has publicly recruited a very large number of additional soldiers, more, by the way, than we had at the height of the war back in the end of 2023. 400,000 additional soldiers.
And we have less fronts, less active fronts. I mean, we have a ceasefire in South Lebanon at the moment. We have so-called ceasefire in Syria. And the Houthis are not firing rockets at the moment. Anyway, it didn't cause us too many reserve units and soldiers to battle the ballistic missiles, only few airplanes.
And then on the official level, the IDF says in the official plan for the year of 2025, they're calling it a war year, not a maintenance year, not a limited war year, a war year with two fronts.
War year.
A year of war.
Ah, okay, gotcha. A war year.
So on one hand...
Unintended. Anyway, so they're saying it's a year of war. Thank you, Yair, for clarifying our...
If I can't understand it, I bet somebody else.
Someone else, what is he saying? Anyway, so it's a year of war. And we have two fronts that the Chief of Staff has sort of identified as our fronts this year. And one is Hamas, Gaza, and the other one is Iran. No mention of Lebanon, no mention of Syria, no mention of anything else. Not Egypt, by the way, which is something that we've been talking about a lot.
That's good, actually,
No Egypt. The two fronts, Hamas, Gaza, and Iran. Those are the fronts that our army is going to be fighting in active war against in the coming year. And we're already rallying the troops to do exactly that. We're in this really weird situation where just this last week, Witkoff, the emissary, the U.S. emissary to the Middle East, they've been doing a bunch of weird things. They've been trying to negotiate directly with Hamas, and then at the same time...
To release the American hostages, like the Israeli-American hostages.
They tried to open an additional channel, understanding that things weren't working in the ongoing channels. They were using intermediaries. And then additionally to that, he's come with this new idea of look, there was the ceasefire agreement. We're supposed to be in phase 2. It never started.
We never even discussed the
phase 2 will never come
if
they don't gonna like and subscribe.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Tomer. If you like what we do here and want to know what's happening in Israel, first of all, you can come and visit us here in the studio when you're in Israel and Jerusalem. Just, give us a call, leave a comment in the comment box, and we'll reach out to you to coordinate the exact time and date, like the amazing people that came in person to see us here. And also, click the share, like, subscribe, this little bell, and receive daily updates of what's happening in Israel. So why? So you can pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Okay, keep going about the hostages.
So we were supposed to be in phase 2. Phase 1 was supposed to be this, this multi-week process. We released terrorists, they released hostages. We, for the most part, went through with that stage. During that stage, by the middle of it, we were supposed to be deep in negotiations on what phase 2 looks like. And phase 2 was supposed to be a more permanent end of the current war in the Gaza Strip and the release of all the remaining hostages from Hamas. That never happened. They still hold a bunch of hostages. We never fully ended, and officially today, there is no ceasefire. We're back at a state of, well, we're not necessarily war, but we're not at a ceasefire.
We're not maneuvering, but there is conflicts between IDF forces in the Gaza Strip every day almost against Hamas terrorists that are basically testing the limits, approaching the forces of the IDF, launching rockets supposedly accidentally from the Gaza Strip at our forces, and also releasing videos of hostages. So they are fighting a war, but it's more on the psychological level. And at the same time, the IDF already stopped all the entry of aid trucks into the Gaza Strip. It's important to explain what this means, because Israel has been fighting Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but at the same time has allowed humanitarian aid trucks, and we're talking about hundreds a day.
24,000 since the ceasefire started.
Yeah, that's more than Gaza had before the war began.
It's a huge number.
So it's huge.
You went to see that?
Yeah, I've seen it firsthand. It was ridiculous. Doesn't even begin to describe it. I mean, you just see one lot after the other, full of pallets that are going into Gaza on a daily basis. So, but again, in my mind, a lot of this is symbolic. Hamas already received, we're talking about months worth of equipment, months worth of fuel, months worth of food. So, okay, they might not have fresh fruit in the same level they did last week.
Well, they have rice, they have the basic necessities that they need. But I think it's important to explain that Israel, as it's fighting a war against Hamas terrorists that want to destroy us and murder thousands of our people, still sent humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip for the civilian population. The bad thing about all this is that Hamas automatically hijacks these aid trucks and they'll sells it to the Palestinian people, gets more money, buys more weapons, recruits more terrorists, and launches more attacks against Israel. So it's an endless cycle. So Israel stopped the entry of humanitarian aid trucks. Of course, the international community began saying, Israel, you shouldn't do this. It's really bad. You are harming the population of the Gaza Strip.
But something's different now.
America is with us.
The U.S. administration is with us. This was done with the knowledge and the support of the U.S. administration, knowing full well that Hamas wasn't planning to continue with the negotiation and it was time to pump the brakes on the process to start applying pressure to Hamas. Another really big thing here is the IDF's, let's call it readiness level for this. The IDF looks at this, as far as we're concerned, we never finished the war.
We didn't achieve the objectives.
Exactly. It's a really big issue that's on the table.
Hamas is still in control in the Gaza Strip. We can clearly see that with all their spectacles that they have, releasing the hostages and having them militants marching the streets. They're still in control of Gaza.
Yeah, and that's a problem. We had two goals in this war, specifically as it relates to the Gaza Strip. One was release the hostages. We're still not there yet. Most of them have been released. And the second one was, we say in Hebrew, lemotet, which means to topple the Hamas government. That hasn't happened either. All you need to do is open the news or any video coming out of the Gaza Strip. Clearly, Hamas is still in control. Clearly, they still have the funds, the power, the munitions needed. And Israel hasn't finished the war against them. And that is a really big issue for everyone involved. Just to remind everyone, just a few weeks ago, we were talking about the fact that there was an agreement that was being made over the head of Hamas in Gaza, where the U.S. was talking to Israel, was talking to the Saudis about bringing in international forces and ultimately removing Hamas altogether from the Gaza Strip.
We had some international, companies that monitored the transfer of civilians from the south back to the northern part of the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, but it's not the same as dismantling Hamas, and that's really where we are today. And we need to look at this sort of from a bird's eye view. If you look back a couple weeks, Hamas makes total sense. They saw that an agreement was being made over their head that was going to eliminate their relevance in the Gaza Strip. And so what do? They completely disengage from the negotiations. They say, whatever you offer us, we're not interested. Whatever offer is floated by the Saudis, by Israel, by the U.S., we don't care. We're not, or by the Egyptians, by the way. We're not interested. We're not going to be part of it. And they make sort of a show of like, no, all we want is Israel to cease to exist, and then we'll move forward with the agreement.
Amazing how much leverage power they have with kidnapping civilians. It's the idea of, or what happened with the Bibas family, or how you can deal with people that do stuff like that. That's my question.
No,
where it goes?
Oh, the only option that they have to still survive this war is to keep hostages. So if they give up their hostages, what leverage do they have?
They do. I'll tell you why. Because we, as the Israeli people and the Israeli army, we hold ourselves back. We hold ourselves, and this. I'm not saying this as a strength, by the way. This is also a weakness at the same time. We uphold ourselves to a moral level and a level of restraint in military actions that most countries around the world don't. And when I say most, I mean all countries that engage in war around the world use a level of violence and arbitrary fire against civilian population that the Israeli army, even at the height of the war in the Gaza Strip, never dared to use. You were there to see that firsthand. This isn't our first round or first rodeo, as they say in the U.S.
No, the Gaza Strip. Let me explain to our viewers what it means, okay? So it means that you have terrorists inside a hospital launching rockets at you. You see the terrorist, but you do not have the authorization to carry an airstrike and destroy that building because it is a hospital.
Yeah, unless you're able to, with very precise munitions, remove just the threat.
Just that level, just that room, just that window.
And the reality is many IDF soldiers died because we chose not to use a higher level of violence because of the fear of hurting civilian population in the Gaza Strip. So, and I want to say this to be fair to ourselves and to people who are watching this. We could do much more in the Gaza Strip. Israel as a democracy that is even at the height of war, and in the most, let's call it the most violent and angry moment in our history, we choose not to use all the power that we have again and again and again. It's not Hamas that forced us into that. We chose, and it's almost like this automatic moral choice, not to use all the firepower that we have, not anywhere near it, because we don't want to hurt the civilian population. And even now, with full U.S. support, with President Trump egging us on from behind, saying do whatever it takes and whatever level of violence is needed, we still don't do that. The new Chief of Staff, Zamir, he is a more, well, he sounds at least, more hawkish than his predecessor. But that doesn't mean that we're going to do that. And so to your point, Tomer, the whole idea of the hostages is for two reasons. Because Israel chooses to let the hostages issue be a heavy topic, and at the same time, because we choose, and we're going to continue to choose this, not to use all the power we have in unleashing violence and weaponry against the people of Gaza or Lebanon or otherwise. So they always know that even if they didn't have the hostages, we still wouldn't go, let's call it, what was the term that was used in the Vietnam War? Send them back to the Stone Age. We still wouldn't do that.
Yeah, but okay, so what will be different? We've been fighting in the Gaza Strip, maneuvering in Gaza for many months. We didn't topple Hamas. What the tactics will change? How will they change in order to achieve the goal of destroying Hamas? Because something needs to change. Okay, so what, are we going to move one option is to move the civilian population back south again and then like encircle the major cities of Hamas, talking about Gaza City, talking about Khan Yunis and other places that we see that they hold the hostages in, and they are still strong and in command of that. But that will be very, very tough. I mean, first of all, to remove again all the civilian population, and then what, starve them out or something like that?
I hope not. My hope is that there's another play behind the scenes that we're not aware of. And that play is so we talk about the Witkoff ceasefire agreement, which he's coming, this is the U.S. emissary to the Middle East. He said, just hold on, shwaya, as we say in the region. Hold
a few minutes.
Just a couple days more, I'm coming. Please hold off for the full-out war again. What we're going to try to do is a different ceasefire version. And he floated this idea. Toma, correct me if I got the details a little wrong, but it's essentially Hamas gives up 50% of the hostages that remain in their hands on day one of the ceasefire. Is it 30 days or 60 days? I forget. 30 days, I believe.
30 days.
I think it's a 30-day ceasefire agreement. And at the end of it, Israel and Hamas are supposed to reach that said agreement or part of the said agreement that we were supposed to do in phase 2. And then Hamas releases, if we reach an agreement, all the remaining hostages.
And Israel withdraws from Gaza completely, from the Philadelphia corridor and from other locations. And release the hostages, the Palestinian
The nicest thing I can say about that idea is that it's half-baked. It
will release another, 10 living hostages, basically.
I don't see it happening.
Not at all?
Only in a very, very semi-effective way. Because Hamas has no incentive to actually take part in this kind of thing.
But if we're talking about the U.S., so this morning we finding out that there is two faces to this coin, like two sides to this coin. On one hand, the U.S. government is dealing a negotiation with Hamas by themselves to release how much? The American hostages.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, this morning Hamas said that last warning, I'm gonna eliminate you from.
Yeah. Well, very tough situation for Hamas, I would say, at this moment. But they still have the backing of Iran. They're still carrying out major attacks in Judea and Samaria. Yeah. They still have, areas to receive power and to carry out terrorist attacks against Israel. They're not defeated completely. Even if they will be destroyed in Gaza, they still exist in Judea and Samaria, East Jerusalem, which is like right here, by the way. And Iran still backs them.
Let's jump 3 months into the future. So here's what we know. I don't see a scenario where Hamas ceases to exist completely in the Gaza Strip. We've talked about this countless times before. It's an ideological movement.
We've seen it doesn't work. Also, ISIS never ceased to exist completely.
Yeah. It just shrunk part of the society there.
Yeah,
it's
an ideology.
It's part of the culture. It's deeply embedded in the ideology of the people, from the eldest to the youngest. The vast majority of the people that live in the Gaza Strip, over 70% of them, were born after Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip. They know nothing else aside from Hamas, let's just be honest here.
Yeah, and they would vote Hamas again if they had the option now.
Even after they saw the outcome of everything Hamas did. So we know that. So in 3 months and in 9 months, Hamas is still going to exist as an idea and as a movement in the Gaza Strip to some degree. The only, and I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago, the only scenario I see that can change dramatically the situation is an international agreement. That's the only thing that can really change things.
The only thing that can change things is really to remove the population and re-educate them for at least a generation.
Yeah.
Because they've been brainwashed since day one that they entered any kind of school system, work, or anything to do with Hamas governing the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, and that's to your point exactly. If Hamas is left in power in the Gaza Strip,
any kind of power, not just militarily,
we're just going to see the same. And the same is they use all the funds that come in, and it's a lot of funds.
Lots of money.
A lot of funds. They use it all to build terrorist infrastructure. They never rebuild, they never build schools, they never educate the society on anything that isn't hatred and death. So we know that. That's a given. That is sort of a base assumption in this equation. We set that aside now, and the only real solution that's going to change anything is something dramatic that brings in an external power to govern the people of Gaza, is removing part of the population, especially those who are related and affiliated with Hamas, to a different country. We can get to this sort of in speculation, but there are countries now that are talking about an option, Ukraine. But so there are options on the table that weren't a week or two ago. And then another phase in that is that the U.S. and Israel and the Saudis, by extension, we need a quick win when it comes to, let's call it the Gaza problem. The Trump administration doesn't have the timeline to spend 2 years working on this.
No, for sure not. They want to do it in weeks.
So do we.
Yeah.
Look, the Israeli army doesn't want to mobilize half the nation to go back to war in the Gaza Strip. And also, let's bear in mind, what does it mean to go back for an army that's already done 3 rounds in some of the cities of the Gaza Strip? What does it mean to go back again after a multi-month ceasefire? It means we're going back into a hornet's nest, into areas that have already been filled with IEDs once more, into areas that are full of terrorists that are armed once more.
Yeah, and they remember where our troops, built our positions, our posts, our locations, and they booby-trapped these exact locations, the routes. Everything will be even harder this time around.
On the other hand, now we have a free hand to use some of the weapons and tactics that we couldn't do before.
But so the definition of insanity is
do the same thing again, expect a different outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So so if we're back at square one and we say the only solution is let's call it a massive ground maneuver in the Gaza Strip, sounds really familiar to me. We were there. You were there just a few months ago. Members of our team and friends and family of ours
been there multiple times.
Some of the cities were visited 3 times by forces again and again and again. Why should it be any different unless something in the bigger picture changes? And that's my hope with this whole story, is that what we were hearing several weeks ago, I think the news cycle moves so fast that we tend to forget what happened. The U.S. did something unique and unheard of in the region. They pulled in Saudi, they pulled in Israel, and they pulled in let's call it a regional pact over the head of Hamas, which is something that wasn't done before. At the same time, in the last 2 weeks, give or take, there was a summit that took place was it in Egypt? There was one summit that took place in Egypt where Arab countries talked about a humanitarian solution to the Gaza situation and how to rebuild it, but they never talked about how they would bring the money to do that. And then there was another summit.
Minor issue.
There was, what was it in Riyadh, the secondary summit, which was talking about, it almost takes us back to the pictures of Sykes-Picot and Yalta Convention before World War II, where the superpowers of the world get together to talk about what the little players are going to do. And you had Saudi, the US, the Russians. Who else was there? I need to brush up on my news. Anyway, but some of the superpowers of the world talking about how they reshape power structures. And that's the kind of thing that can really change the outcome of the Gaza Strip. That's the only kind of thing that can change it. Because again, we know the assumption, Israel isn't, and we're not planning to and don't want to annihilate the population.
No, but we can, listen, we can exert a lot more pressure on Hamas now. Let's say we already cut the aid supplies in. That's a big deal for them. We can still, by the way, we still provide water and electricity into the Gaza Strip.
Can I play devil's advocate?
So if we cut that also.
Yeah, can I play devil's advocate?
What's that? Okay, play devil's advocate, whatever you said.
Red team. So you say humanitarian pressure, it pressures Hamas. Do they care about their population?
No.
No.
So no, but they need that in order to recruit new fighters. By the way, the average age of a terrorist in Hamas, in the Gaza Strip, is 16 and a half years old.
Average being the key word.
Yeah, meaning that there's also a 13-year-old and 11-year-old. Yeah.
So here's what Israeli
intelligence... How do they recruit them? By promising food to the family.
Food and cash. So here's the problematic element of that statement. Israeli intelligence said 2 days ago that Hamas has 6 months worth of supplies in the Gaza Strip. Yeah. Okay, so
and you can't wait.
So no element of pressure is going to make a big difference in that. And so again, we go back to this conversation where we're talking about like what's happening this week. Forget what's happening this week. What's happening in the next 6 months? And unless there's a shift in, let's call it, the mechanics of the whole machine as the Middle East relates to the Gaza Strip, it's not going to change things. That's what we need to be pushing for.
Israel Katz,
our Minister of Defense.
So he opened a new office for Gazans that want to leave the Gaza Strip.
And this is something that people also don't know, Tomer. It's a good point, because you have, 150,000 Palestinians that voluntarily, even more than voluntarily, they paid money to leave the Gaza Strip to have a better life. So some of them even were smuggled themselves into Europe to receive a better chance of something that's not
This is before the October 7th war.
Before the October 7th. And after October 7th, just in the last few months, I mean, there's 200 a day that leave Gaza and don't come back to Egypt.
Yeah, there's more that went to Jordan.
A program to help them leave the Gaza Strip. If you want to leave, Israel will take you.
Yeah, the problem is that Hamas does not like it when his population leaves.
Unless it's the sons of the executives in Hamas.
Yeah.
They all mysteriously vanished from the Gaza Strip before the war started. So let's be honest here. Yeah, in the Palestinian Authority and in Hamas,
it's very corrupt.
They're really big on shouting. You know, we stand with our land. We stand with our land. Their sons and daughters study abroad with the money that they stole from the aid that was given to them. They study in English language schools in Jerusalem and outside of the country, and live luxurious lives that are very far from the morals of Islam in other, I don't want to name countries, in
those amazing countries.
In amazing countries around the world.
Well, it's easy to know where you see the demonstrations on campus universities, the pro-Hamas universities. That's where the money goes.
So just to remind everyone, who was it? The son of Haniyeh. The son of Haniyeh in the beginning. Who's no longer with us.
Not sadly.
Ken, I was being facetious. Anyway, this was like, I think the second month, maybe November of 2023. He held a supercar race to raise funds for the people in Gaza.
Just the car itself was worth it.
He owns multiple supercars, and he doesn't live in the Gaza Strip. That's the level of corruption that exists in that society. Anyway, back to our point. We're in this really weird situation where unless there's a substantial leverage on the Gaza Strip to change the situation altogether, we won't see that. I'd say, and this is sort of like the disruptive power of the Trump administration, that now more than ever there is a chance of that happening. If I were Hamas and if I were Israel, I'd look at the speed in which things are happening when it comes to U.S. treaties and U.S. agreements around the world. Look at what's been happening with Ukraine and Russia. I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole interesting story. Look at what's been happening with trade wars with Mexico, with other Central American countries, with the Canadians, with a NATO treaty. Unless I already said that, with China. There's a whole lot of things that are moving at this speed that it's blitz speed.
Yeah.
If I was looking at that, and I am looking at that, and I was the head of a nation state in this area, or the head of Hamas, I'd say, I think it's about time we have an agreement now
have to
versus
do something fast, or
they're going to change their mind.
Yeah.
Whatever agreement is on the table today, 30 days from now, it might be 10 times worse for us. Now and same applies for Iran, by the way. If you're looking at it, now we're being cozied up by Russia through the U.S. Towards Iran. Iranians can look at it and say, oh, look, the pressure's off. The right thing to say is the pressure's off today.
Yeah.
If the administration has a plan for this region, if you don't play along with the nice part of the plan, you're going to get the stick on the other end of it.
Yeah, true. And just to give an overview of the situation in Israel. Okay, so the residents of the southern part, the Gaza communities, are starting to rebuild, starting to go home. I mean, we're getting back to kind of normal in that area. Of course, we have a lot of soldiers that are still defending our borders. But then if you look at the northern border with Hezbollah, with Lebanon, the IDF still holds 5 positions inside South Lebanon to create a sort of a buffer zone to defend the Israeli communities. And the government issued an order, or basically told the people of Israel that they can go back to rebuild their houses and go back to their communities in the north. The community leaders are saying, we don't feel safe enough to go back because the situation is still
on the border.
Hezbollah is walking on the border, and we just seen Hezbollah terrorists go into underground tunnels and houses to try to retrieve weapons that were left behind. So this is the situation in the north. And many people are asking us, like, how can we support Israel in this time? So, I mean, despite the fact that you have tens of thousands of Israelis that had to leave their house, their workplace, their businesses, I mean, the economic situation is very hard. So how can you help them practically? Okay, we have a great sponsor for today's show called Arza. Arza is basically gathering small gifts, food, crafts from all over Israel, from small businesses in Israel, especially in areas that were affected by this war. And if you want to receive a box from Israel to your house, I mean, to really help the people of Israel, it will help us, and you will get a nice souvenir from the land. I mean, if you can't come to visit us here in person, this is a way to connect with Israel. I know these people here are here in person, so it's a lot better to walk the land of Israel, but this is, second best. So you can go to www.arzabox.com, and then if you want an 18% discount on your Arzabox subscription, insert the code 18 TBNIL. I got this correctly.
Good job, Yair.
Yeah, you like that?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's really nice stuff. I mean, it helps Israel. It helps us create more content. This is how we can, pay Tomer and our staff here and keep doing this.
Mainly Tomer.
If you want to keep seeing this guy with us, buy a subscription.
Yes. Otherwise, So here's one more thing to bear in mind, Yair.
Yeah.
On the topic of helping Israel and standing with Israel, this is what it looks like. And I think the biggest win that we could possibly have in showing the world that the war didn't affect us to the degree they expected, and that people are still willing to come, is you guys coming to the country. For us, that's like a huge show of support. Thank you for being in Israel, and thank you for, when in a time where your family and friends are probably saying, don't go, it's dangerous, this, that, flights are expensive, it's getting better by the day, but we're still not back to where it should be. This is what it looks like, and I'm saying this also for the sake of people at home. This is the best way to show support. Buy something from Israel, come to Israel, spend cash in the country, get behind something that's happening in person.
Pray for Israel, but pray personally. Pray for someone, Pray for Mati. He's still in the IDF reserve for what, 2 more weeks or something like that? We'll see.
Just under 2 more weeks.
Yeah, it's been there for...
Not that I'm counting the days.
It's been there for a month and a half, and if you calculate the days since October 7, it's been over 300 days.
Going on 300 days.
Almost 300 days. Yeah. And he has a job, 3 kids, and, life.
At this point, we'll see about the job. Just kidding. Anyway, so it's this really interesting situation to wrap everything that we've been talking about and start pulling it together. So, we talked about the foreign powers that be that are talking about an agreement.
Yeah.
Hamas is doing everything they can not to enter another phase of an agreement. They have no reason in the world to do so. Any agreement that will happen will exclude them from it and make sure that the future of the Middle East is without them. They're not interested in that for obvious reasons. So they're not cooperating whatsoever with the whole thing. Then it gets interesting. Israel has recruited people. I think it's worth talking about our new chief of staff,
Eyal Zamir.
Herzi Halevi
We like Eyal Zamir, by the way, because
I'll get to this.
He's a tanker.
So Eyal Zamir is
from the tanks unit.
Is the first of two. He's the first ever officer that comes from a tank unit and made it all the way to the chief of staff. Yair and I are both tank officers.
And Boogie Alon, wasn't he also?
No. So the issue is, back in the day, we're talking like 30 years ago.
Everybody had to be a tank.
Every officer that came from infantry, because the army was built around the armored corps, had to do a round as a regiment commander in the armored corps.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, but they all were red berets. No, not just infantry.
Paratroopers.
Paratroopers are matkal, so red berets all around. Red berets, red shoes, which is, if you know the Israeli army, it means a lot to you. He's the first one to come with a black beret and black shoes, which is what we always carried, all the way through the ranks. Very unique individual. He's considered to be incredibly hawkish, and hawkish not in the sense of like wanting to argue all the time, in the sense of wanting to win the wars that he fights. Yeah, he's highly respected within the Israeli government, has an incredibly intimate relationship with Netanyahu. He was his military secretary for multiple years.
And he was not part of the IDF when October 7 happened. So he's like outside of the system when it failed completely to defend the country.
Why did they say he's the first one?
I don't know, but Alon just told me that Dan Shomron was
so it's like the news headlines. The news headlines in Israel are wrong. Then the whole thing is like he's the first armored corps guy.
Wait, I will get you his profile, like his full profile.
Anyway, we'll look at it later. We'll look at it later on.
Yeah.
Anyway, good guy altogether. Comes highly respected within the Israeli government, highly respected within the Israeli army. Not involved in at least the years leading up to the October 7th attack.
Yeah.
So he's this unique creature, unicorn almost, where he's respected across the board, which at this time in Israel, after
you need it.
You need it. It's an incredibly important place to be in. He comes in guns blazing. Comes into office. One, we don't even bother with like the fanfare and like the ceremonies. It's like this very like quiet ceremony where Herzi Halevi, the previous chief of staff, goes out. He leaves this very long and touching sort of like decree to his successor, saying, in whatever I'm leaving because of the failure of October 7th, I'm leaving to you, Zamir, the legacy to never forget what happened on October 7th. Very strong, very impactful words. Zamir comes in and he says, I have a plan. We're going back to war. We're not going to hesitate to win this war. Here's the battle plans. Let's recruit the soldiers. Literally,
we have plans already to conquer Gaza if we get the order from the political echelon of Israel within a few weeks, a few days, something like that. We have the soldiers well prepared for any kind of mission. And I mean, the country, the Middle East is different.
Bombs.
The Middle East is different than what it was.
And we received.
What do we have?
Shiny bombs.
Shiny bombs. Shiny bombs that arrived.
Part of what's interesting is under the Biden administration, and I want to be fair to the Biden administration. Under their administration, we received more foreign aid and more munitions than any other U.S. government in history, including the 1973 war. Huge amounts of munitions and stuff like that. For people that are interested, it's much less than what Ukraine received. A fraction,
a lot less,
but it's still a significant amount of equipment and gifts. Let's call it gifts in kind, the equivalent of a lot of cash that came into Israel, both in current gifts and then also things that are future commitments. But the Biden administration and the U.S. the Israeli administration under Netanyahu were not in sync about how the war was being fought in Gaza and elsewhere. And sometimes, on certain issues, the Biden administration withheld weapon shipment that were already approved and equipment, including tractors, withheld them for months.
D9s, bulldozers, which are very important, by the way, fighting in Gaza, because they are the only one that saves you from the bombs, the IEDs that Hamas is placing on the sides of the roads.
And so this was significant. So much so that Netanyahu actually went out in English publicly, calling on the U.S. administration, sort of in a public way, hey guys, you promised to give us these things. We call on you to do it immediately. Anyway, it didn't happen under the Biden administration. Trump goes into office, I think within 3 days of being in, 2 or 3 days of being in office, they released everything that was withheld, including 9,000 one-ton bombs to be used by the Air Force. It sounds like a lot, but they're the kind of bombs that are used to knock down a single building, not multiple buildings, including tractors, including a bunch of other things. So it wasn't necessarily more aid, but it was everything that was withheld overnight was given. Very substantial.
Now we're going to get a lot of D9s.
A lot of bulldozers. So, and then going back to sort of how we reshape the region, the U.S. is sort of in this maximum pressure campaign. First on Iran, That's been going on since day one of the administration. Secondly, on the Gaza Strip, you know how the Witkoff plan, you have sort of the weight of the American administration pushing for this agreement, Israel, Hamas, and otherwise.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, and that's happening.
Yeah, in Lebanon we see is like playing game.
Yeah.
The Lebanese president, the government is stating that they will not be another state to launch attacks against Israel or against other countries. We want to defend the people of Lebanon, by the people of Lebanon, by the army of Lebanon. So it seems like they are trying to actually project that they're taking back their country from Hezbollah. But Iran is not giving up at the same time. So Iran just launched a new, high-tech company, like we like to say in the Middle East, a new high-tech company, basically a new terrorist organization to replace Hezbollah. Its new name is, what's the new name, Tomer? It is the Islamic Resistance, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Islamic
Resistance.
For a minute there, I was hoping that they would, take note of the fact that we're in Ramadan season and say,
IRI.
Look, IAI?
IRI.
All right. Anyway, so...
They love their names.
I feel like it's not even worth... I feel like it's not even worth talking about some of these things. But here's how it could have played out differently.
GPT.
Yeah. It could have played out differently. And we talk about this all the time, and I want to remind people of the fact that there is another alternative. The Muslim nations and Iran could say at one point, look, how about we stop destroying the world and everything and the quality of life for everyone around us in a 2,000-kilometer range, and instead do what their religion preaches to do, but do the right thing, and maybe we stop with the violence and try to rebuild our economy. And maybe we don't try to call for the destruction of Israel, the U.S., and everything that they hold dear, and instead rebuild Lebanon that they destroyed, and instead rebuild Syria, which they destroyed, and instead stop murdering people within Iraq.
That's invest in rebuilding instead of more destruction.
Yeah, so I want to put that on the table. You never hear that from them. That should be what they're talking about. There never is a virtuous conversation. There never is a positive spin on things. It's always more death and destruction. And that brings you to this end point where you once again have to be reminded of the fact that this regime, it's not the people of Iran, it's the Islamic government of Iran, which is radicalizing, as in it's an ongoing negative force in the region, always chooses the path of death, violence, and destruction, both internally for the people of Iran and for the region. And the only end game is, if that's what they do, and that's their only operating system, what do you do with them? You remove them. Yeah, there is no middle ground.
And I hope also for the people of Iran, especially for the people of Iran, that they will have better leadership, better, government to provide the basic necessities to live in that country. Because instead of investing all the money and all the economy of that country in spreading terror, supporting Houthis in Yemen to fire ballistic missiles at Israel and at United States vessels in the Red Sea, then invest in economy, in roads, electricity. Iran does not have full electricity 24 hours a day. They have maybe 4 hours a day or something like that in certain areas.
Yeah, look, they're all, across the board, they're a destructive force. Everything they do brings ruin and it brings destruction.
By the way, Mati, I love the Iranian people. They watch us. They are responding to me in the comments. They're sending me messages on Facebook saying, we are with you. One day we will not have this evil government with us and we will have peace with Israel again.
Look, I personally, I pray for the day.
Which we had.
We did. I pray for the day that the Iranian people have a better government. Yeah. And I feel the same way. And my hope is the same for the Palestinian people, for the Gazan people. Now the Lebanese people do have a sort of a new government, a new government that isn't afraid of being assassinated by Hezbollah, which is something that happened in the past.
For now.
Yeah, well, let's hope it persists.
The beginning.
And the same applies to the people of Syria. All the people in this region. And again, we always talk about like the heads of the state and like the nations. Nations, they're not one chunk of people. They have people with different opinions. Some of them agree with the evil governments. And in the Iranian case, the majority of them disagree with the agenda of the government and the MO of the government. And I think people need to be, I'm sure people need to be aware of that. Yeah. So that's one thing. Two, if we look at like how the positive outcome for this region can take place, in the end, it's a combination of two things that we always talk about. One, looking straight, deadhead into reality and not trying to avoid it. Hamas is an organization of death and destruction. The Iranian Islamic regime, same.
Yeah.
You can't look at them and say, maybe this evil machine will one day turn into this,
good.
This power, this force of good in the region. So you have to fight the war until they're gone and they're off the table. At the same time, think about the people. Bear in mind the fact that The people of Gaza deserve better. The people of Lebanon deserve better. The people of
Syria
Iran
deserve better.
Yeah,
they Yemen deserve better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They deserve something that isn't dictatorial, something that isn't destructive, something that isn't this radicalizing Islamic government that takes away their civil liberties, that locks the women into the house, that prevents them from driving, that murders people that resist the government, that disappears, as we say, anyone who writes anything publicly against the government. That's their life. And for every Jew, American, and European that is killed by Islamic terrorism, there's probably 9 or 10 that are killed in an Arab world that no one ever talks about. And they're dying in Africa, and they're dying in the Middle East, and it's something that's that's hidden behind the headlines in the world.
Yeah.
So I think, big picture, pray for that. Pray for a change in the government of those countries, and then also take action to bring down the evil regimes that are the ones who enable and enforce and bring forth that sense of evil.
Yeah,
that's where we have to be.
Well, I think that we have some time for Q&A from our viewers. Alon, you want to give them the mic? And if somebody wants to ask a question, you're welcome to take the microphone. And is the camera pointing at her, or she should come here? She can come here. And
it's all right.
It's only a few 100,000 people watching.
Don't look too happy about it.
As you were speaking...
Can you stand in the middle, please? Thank you.
Shout? Yes.
You're much better looking in person.
Even Mati?
You lie so gracefully.
So as I was listening to all of this, I was thinking there's another war that's going on, which is the war of public opinion.
Absolutely.
And the Western world has accepted, and a lot of them have accepted this ideology in support of Hamas. And so, as I see you trying to end what's been going on here, and lives will be lost on both sides. And again, Israel will be blamed for everything. And just ideas on how to combat that. We can go back, we can talk about the things that we see, hear, and feel, but people honestly don't want to listen. I went back, I was here last year, went back and tried to talk about the food that went into Gaza. Yeah. And people just basically didn't believe me. Really? Oh, I've not heard that. That can't be true. Yeah. So, and it's not just the U.S., it's the Western world that has kind of adopted this ideology that Hamas good and Israel bad.
Yeah, in the beginning of the war, I couldn't grasp it because, I was fighting and we were seeing on the ground the situation and the atrocities and the hatred that was carried out by Hamas against Israel. And we were basically defending ourselves for our lives, defending our children. And then you open the news in the international media and it's completely what you said, completely opposite. And then I realized that this is something more than just the rational ideas of people. It's a spiritual war. And the enemy is using lies and deceit and a spirit of evil and hatred to basically brainwash many people around the world, okay? So when you think about it that way, okay, so how do you battle a spiritual war? Okay, first of all, you need to share the truth because people need to know what's happening, okay? So this is why we are doing what we're doing here, and thank you for coming and being part of us and watching and coming on the show, because that's the first step, to share what is happening from the ground. And then, of course, we won't convince those that are filled with hate and don't want to listen. But we will convince many, which is the majority of those that are in the middle, they just don't know, okay? And then those that are standing with us, like you, if we share the truth, if we pray for the situation, we need to make a decision. Are we on the side of good or are we on the side of evil? That's what also God told us to do. We can't be posher. We can't be like not hot.
Lukewarm. Lukewarm is the word.
We can't be lukewarm. We need to decide, are we hot or cold? And I think that this war in general convinced the world that there is no gray areas anymore. There is good and bad. And as the bodies of Yeshua, we need to make a decision and stand up for the truth. So, it's bad, but it made all of us in a point that we have to make a decision and stand for the truth. We can't just be neutral anymore.
I'd add to that one more thought, which is people in the West often value, myself included sometimes, we value comfort over the right thing. And the opinion thing goes in line with that, which is people adopt opinions that allow them to feel comfortable with who they are and what they do. So they choose to ignore the facts that make them uncomfortable. For instance, acknowledging that there is good and bad in the world. Because if you acknowledge that there is a good and there is an evil, then you have to call the evil, evil, and you have to call the good, good. And that's going to create some very uncomfortable conversations around you, especially if you're facing people that are evil.
Yeah.
So that's part of that. So they choose this wishy-washy, like unclear opinion on things. Well, look, there's truth on both sides. No, there isn't. There are media outlets that outright lie on a regular basis. It's malicious. Yeah, it's malicious. Al Jazeera, BBC, where in their reporting there is no Hamas. Yeah. Hamas doesn't exist in their reporting. Yeah, that's not a mistake. That's not editorial, sort of like something that they missed. It's intentional. Mm-hmm. It's malicious and it's planned. And people look at that, they say, no, they couldn't possibly be evil. No, human evil exists. Human good exists. You have to acknowledge that and recognize that. And it's much more comfortable for people on many levels to just say, no, the Jews are the source of all the problems, versus saying, no, Islam is a disease in the Middle East, especially radical Islam. There are a lot of good Muslims, but as a government and under radical Islam, it's the people that brought you things like ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian government for over 40 years, 45 years at this point. That's what it's brought forth. You have to be able to say those kind of things, and it makes people incredibly uncomfortable to say such, let's call it exclamation mark statements. It's not PC, it makes for an unpleasant work environment. Their cousin gets angry at them at Thanksgiving dinner. But if you believe in something that's true, you have to stand up for it. And if you don't, then what value do your values carry if you're not able to speak on what's right and wrong? So I think it's also psychological. It's not just this factual thing of, and then social media exasperates the entire issue, where it creates an echo chamber where you only hear opinions that you agree with, and you never are countered with information that counters it. It's a really tricky situation. But I think on a fundamental level, people need to choose to go outside of their comfort zone and say, no, there's a right and wrong, and I want to stand up for it, even if it makes for an unpleasant conversation at lunch and in the office.
Well, I think you're right that people don't want to acknowledge there's evil. That's a very strong statement, that there's evil, and a lot of people don't believe there's evil. There's just good and bad. Yeah. And so I think once you accept there is evil, there's no longer standing in the middle. And, maybe that needs to happen more. And sometimes that's a religious point, it's seen as a religious point of view.
Yeah, I'd say that there's another element to it, which both Old Testament and New Testament are very, very clear about there being, one, there being good and bad, and two, that there are sins that will cast you out from the community and cast you out, let's call it from the community and God's protection. Very, very clear about that. And in our Western mindset, I think it's that thought of like a clear line of when you've chosen evil, you are evil. You're not outside of God's grace, but you're definitely outside of not seeing ramifications for your actions. It's been hijacked by this very Western and let's call it a humanistic mindset of everything's right and everything's wrong and something like that, where you just have to say, no, there is good and bad. I've chosen right, and to point out the evil in the world. And a lot of people it's very uncomfortable to say that. And to say to someone who's, look, I don't think that you're necessarily a bad person, but your religion has
believe in something really bad.
Yeah, your religion has bred violence and death to countless millions around the world. Maybe that's not the right choice. And you could say the same thing to socialism in other countries. Not everything is a shade of gray. Some things just are bad at their core.
Well, and I think a lot of times it's just a politicized. Where in our country we haven't seen this kind of war and violence. Yeah. And so it's all political talk. It doesn't become
personal when somebody launches a rocket at your house.
Exactly. And that's what coming here does for you. Mm-hmm. You see it's very personal.
I love that you said that.
And that it could be on our doorstep anytime. And I think that makes a whole difference in the way you look at everything.
What's your name?
Gail.
Gail. That's already happened in Europe. What you're describing.
Yes.
People talk about it's not what's the expression in English? NIMBY, not in my backyard. Yeah. So people say, radical Islam is not a problem of Europe, it's a problem of Israel. Let them deal with it. Okay, you chose not to deal with it. Came to your doorstep. Now you have, and I could do 2 hours of talking about this. Definitely. You have terrorists blowing up in major European cities,
or car ramming attacks,
driving through crowds on Christmas markets, systematically raping women because of ethnicity and religion, And now it's not PC to talk about it, so you can't even deal with the core issue. So when you lose the moral compass of being able to clearly state this is good and this is bad, and also to say, well, I also want to take care of my kind in a way that protects them, then what are you left with?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting place to be in.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question, somebody?
Another victim?
Not all at once? Thank you. Okay, Matti. I think that's it for today.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Guys, thank you for being with us. Thank you for standing with Israel. When you can, please come visit us here in the studio, tour the land of Israel, make it personal.
Yes.
Everything that happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. So standing with Israel against Hamas, Iran, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and all these evil organizations is basically the front lines before this war comes to your doorsteps in Europe or in the United States. And when you pray for the peace of Jerusalem, make it personal. Please pray for Matti as he's in reserve, for Alon, one of our colleagues here.
Who's never been to Gaza.
Definitely. And keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Matti here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.